There is a question that has followed historians for centuries, one that gets lost beneath the weight of gold and stone and the names of kings carved into eternity. It is not about how they built the pyramids, or how many wives a pharaoh kept, or what treasures were sealed inside a tomb. It is a simpler question, and a more human one. What did it actually feel like to be alive in ancient Egypt? Not the Egypt of Rameses the Great, standing before his armies. Not the Egypt of golden funerary masks and alabaster jars. The other Egypt. The one that woke before sunrise and ground wheat by hand and prayed to a small clay figurine on a household shelf. The Egypt of the 95%. In this video, I use modern AI tools to reconstruct the world of 1250 BC, the streets, homes, temples, and riverbanks of ancient Thebes, allowing us to move through spaces that haven't existed for 3,000 years. Not to celebrate power, to understand what it meant to simply live. We begin at the river. You would not understand Egypt without the Nile. Not intellectually. Anyone can read that fact. But standing on its west bank at dawn in the month the Egyptians called Paini, in the final weeks of the season of Shemu, the dry harvest season, the river would rewrite your understanding of time itself. The Nile is not a backdrop. It is a clock, a calendar, a god. Every element of daily existence in ancient Thebes, from the food on a laborer's table to the prayers whispered inside a temple, is synchronized to its rhythms. The Egyptian year is divided into 3 seasons, each one defined entirely by the river's behavior. Shemu is the harvest, the hot, dry months when the water is low and the fields are worked down to cracked earth. Akhet is the inundation, when the Nile swells and floods its banks and transforms the entire valley floor into a shallow inland sea. Peret is the growing season, when the water retreats and leaves behind a thick black deposit of silt so fertile it almost seems like the land is breathing. Right now, in this reconstruction, it is late Shemu. The water is at its lowest. The fields along the eastern bank are pale and stubbled. The air carries dust and heat, and the smell of drying vegetation. Donkeys move along the embankment carrying amphorae of water. Children run between the reed beds. Fishermen stand knee-deep in the shallower channels, lifting nets made from twisted flax. In approximately 6 weeks, all of this will change. The inundation will come as it always does, as it has come for 10,000 years before this morning, and will come for thousands of years after it. The farmers know it is coming the way you know a door is about to open. They can feel it in the air temperature, read it in the color of the water upstream. When Akhet arrives, Thebes will transform. The flat agricultural plains on both sides of the river will disappear beneath brown water. The population will contract to higher ground. The construction projects that require large gangs of workers will ramp up, because the farmers, temporarily freed from their fields, will have something else to do. They will go to work on the monuments. This is perhaps the most persistently misunderstood fact about ancient Egypt. The men who built the temples and the tombs and the colossal statues that still stand along the Nile today were not slaves. They were workers. Free men, organized into labor gangs, paid in rations. We know this not from theory, but from the surviving records themselves, written on papyrus and on stone, lists of names and daily allocations. A skilled worker at a major construction site in 1250 BC could expect to receive roughly 10 loaves of bread and between 1 and 2 jugs of beer each day. Senior craftsmen received more. Foremen received considerably more. This is not charity. This is a wage economy expressed in commodities. The men working on the mortuary temples at this moment in Thebes know exactly what they are owed. They will strike if they do not receive it. We have the records of at least one documented labor strike from this period, workers laying down their tools and marching to the administrative offices to demand overdue rations. They were ultimately paid. The system, for all its authoritarian structure, required a functioning workforce, and a workforce that died of hunger or despair was not functional. Imagine walking through the workers' village of Deir el-Medina on the West Bank, the community built specifically to house the craftsmen and artists who worked on the Valley of the Kings. The streets are narrow. The houses are connected wall to wall in long terraces, each home perhaps 5 to 6 meters wide and 12 to 15 meters long. Inside, the rooms stack one behind the other in a line. The front room where guests are received. The main living area with a low platform bed built directly from mud brick dot. The kitchen at the back, open to allow smoke to escape, with a clay oven and flat grinding stones worn smooth by years of use. Below, a small cellar cut into the rock for storing food. Above, a flat roof where the family sleeps during the hottest months, under an open sky. The walls inside are not bare. They are plastered and painted. Even in a laborer's home, you will find color. Red ochre and yellow and white. Images of the family, of offerings, of protective symbols. These are people who cared about beauty, who spent time and material and labor making their small homes into something more than shelter. And the legal structure of that home may surprise you. Egyptian women in 1250 BC hold property rights that women in many parts of the world will not receive for another 3,000 years. A married woman in ancient Thebes can own land, inherit independently, enter legal contracts, and initiate divorce proceedings without requiring permission or representation from a male guardian. Marriage itself is primarily a practical and social arrangement rather than a religious ceremony. The couple moves in together. The woman brings her own property into the household. If the marriage ends, she leaves with it. These are not radical ideas in Thebes. They are simply the law. But that brings us to the temple. You cannot understand the daily life of an ordinary Egyptian in 1250 BC without understanding that religion here is not a set of beliefs. It is a technology. It is a system of maintenance as practical and urgent as irrigation or grain storage, designed to keep the universe from collapsing. This is the great temple complex of Karnak, seat of Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. In 1250 BC, it is already centuries old, expanded and rebuilt and added to by every pharaoh who has sat on the throne of Egypt. The pylons, the massive gateway towers, rise over 30 meters above the ground. The hypostyle hall, a forest of 134 columns, some of them over 20 meters tall and so wide that 3 adults with arms outstretched could not encircle a single one. You would not be allowed inside, not past the outer court. The inner temple is not a place of public worship in any sense you would recognize. Ordinary Egyptians do not pray inside Karnak. The god Amun-Ra is housed in a sacred innermost sanctuary, his golden statue kept in a small dark room at the heart of the complex. Tended daily by a small group of high priests who approach the statue backwards, sweeping their own footprints from the floor so that no trace of human presence remains. Every morning, in a ritual called the opening of the mouth, the statue is ceremonially awakened, washed, dressed in fresh linen, and presented with offerings of food and incense. The logic is explicit and practical. Amun-Ra must be fed and maintained. If the god weakens, if the rituals lapse, if the priests falter, the cosmic order, what the Egyptians call Ma, would begin to deteriorate. The Nile might not rise. The crops might fail. The sky might crack open. This is not metaphor. This is engineering. But here's the strange part. For most of the people walking the streets of Thebes this morning, Amun-Ra is not their primary religious concern. The great gods are remote, housed in their inner sanctuaries, attended by specialists, inaccessible to ordinary life. The gods that matter most at the household level are different, smaller, more intimate. Bes is one of them. His image appears on household walls throughout Thebes in 1250 BC, a squat Leonan, almost cartoonish figure with a protruding tongue, surrounded by protective symbols. He is not beautiful. He is not dignified. He is a guardian of the home, specifically of pregnant women and newborns, and his image is carved and painted everywhere new life is vulnerable. On the walls of birthing rooms, on headrests, on small amulets worn around the necks of children. Tauret is another, the pregnant hippopotamus goddess, standing upright, holding a protective SA symbol in her thick hands. She is the protector of mothers in labor. Her image is found in virtually every domestic context across the social spectrum, from the humblest village home to the palace. These are the gods of daily life, the gods that answer when you knock. Now imagine it is midday. The heat in Thebes in late Shemu is not uncomfortable. It is a physical presence, something that presses down on you. That makes the limestone walls of the city shimmer faintly at the edges. Most of the city has slowed. Workers rest in the shade of the colonnaded market areas along the river road. The smell of bread is everywhere. It always is. Bread in ancient Egypt is not a side dish. It is the meal. There are records of over 40 distinct varieties, made from emmer wheat or barley, shaped into rounds or cones or twisted forms, flavored with dates or coriander or honey for the wealthier households. The daily ration bread of a construction worker is dense and coarse and filled with inadvertent grit from the grinding stones, which wear down over time and contaminate the flour. Examination of ancient Egyptian skeletal remains shows severe dental wear in virtually every individual studied, regardless of social class. Everyone ate the same abrasive bread. Beer is equally universal, not the thin, carbonated beverage of later centuries. Egyptian beer in 1250 BC is thick and viscous, made from fermented bread, strained through a woven basket. It is opaque, closer in texture to a grain porridge than a liquid. It is also safer to drink than the Nile water available to most people, because the fermentation process eliminates many of the pathogens that make the river dangerous. Beer is not an indulgence. It is nutritional and hygienic necessity, consumed by men, women, children, workers, scribes, and priests alike. A scribe, however, would want you to know the difference between him and the beer-drinking laborer. The scribal class is the clerical machinery of the Egyptian state, the men who record the grain inventories and the labor allocations and the temple offerings and the legal contracts and the royal decrees. They are educated from childhood, spending years in the scribal schools called houses of life attached to temples, learning to read and write the approximately 700 hieroglyphic signs in common use, as well as the faster cursive script called hieratic used for everyday administrative documents. They are few. Literacy in Egypt in 1250 BC is estimated at somewhere between 1 and 5% of the total population. A scribe in a good position does not do physical labor. This distinction is something they are almost aggressively proud of. One surviving text from this period, a piece of school instruction, lists the hardships of every manual profession in considerable detail. The farmer toiling in the heat, the soldier marching under the whip, the sandal maker crouching over his last until his back failed. And in each case the conclusion is the same: be a scribe instead. They kept the civilization running, not in spite of their distance from physical labor, but because of it. Someone had to count the loaves. At the top of this entire system, elevated so far above the scribe and the laborer and the farmer that he occupies a different category of existence entirely, stands Rameses II. He is 50 years old in 1250 BC, which in this era is an extraordinary age, already well into a reign that will last more than 60 years in total. He is physically robust, by all surviving accounts, 6 feet tall or close to it, with a strong jaw and the characteristic hook nose, visible on dozens of surviving statues and relief carvings. He has fathered well over 100 children. He has fought battles, signed the world's first recorded peace treaty with the Hittite king Hattusili III, and covered Egypt with his image. But Rameses does not experience power the way a modern strongman might. He does not simply rule. He is, functionally and theologically, the living embodiment of Ma'at. The stability of the natural world runs through him. If he falters in his ritual duties, the cosmic balance tips. Every morning he performs his own ritual obligations. Every major construction project, every military campaign, every diplomatic treaty is framed not as political action but as cosmic maintenance. This is a different kind of burden than ambition. It is closer to something we might call obligation on a universal scale. The sun is beginning to lower toward the western cliffs now, the ones the Egyptians call the place of truth. the limestone escarpment behind which the Valley of the Kings lies hidden, the western bank of the Nile, where the sun dies each evening, is the land of the dead. The mortuary temples, the tombs, the entire architecture of the afterlife is arranged on this side of the river. When a body is prepared for burial, it crosses the Nile from east to west, from the land of the living to the land of the dead, on a journey that mirrors the movement of the sun. And here is the thing that may reframe everything else you have understood about ancient Egypt this evening. The elaborate preparations for death, the mummification, the grave goods, the spells inscribed on papyrus to navigate the underworld, they are not expressions of morbidity. They are expressions of exactly the opposite. The Egyptians prepared so extensively for death because they loved life so completely that they could not conceive of simply ending. The afterlife they imagined, the field of reeds, the Aru, is not a transcendent spiritual realm of cloud and light. It is Egypt. Their Egypt. The same river, the same fields, the same flat-roofed houses and grinding stones and clay beer jars and small figures of Bes on the wall. Just permanent, just perfected, just freed from drought and disease and the grinding erosion of the bread. The most moving thing about ancient Egypt is not its scale. It is not the weight of the stones or the span of the centuries or the ambition of its kings. It is the quiet domesticity of its deepest longing. That ordinary men and women in 1250 BC looked at their lives, hard and brief and uncertain as those lives were, and decided that what they wanted most from eternity was more of the same. More of this. More of the heat, and the river, and the bread, and the children sleeping on the flat roof under the stars. That tells you everything you need to know about what it felt like to be alive here. If there is another civilization you want me to reconstruct, another lost world you want to walk through, leave it in the comments. I read everyone.